In December 1930, Samuel Shotton, a retired postmaster, returned home with his wife Clara to find that his house had been burgled. There was no sign of a forced entry. The bedclothes upstairs were dishevelled, and the tin where he kept his savings had been emptied, with the lid being carefully placed back in its exact original position. Sound familiar? This appears to be the trademark of the Anfield Housebreaker. But who was the Anfield Housebreaker?
In the summer of 1929, I remember my wife and I had been out for a walk. I had forgotten to take my key, and we had to borrow a key from Mr. Gosling, who lives on the opposite side of Wolverton Street, and his key opens our front door. Some years ago a man named Cadwallader, who lives at 33 Wolverton Street, had a key that opened our door, because he used to drink, and on several occasions he made a mistake and came into our house instead of his own. He has been dead several years, and his widow and son still live at 33 Wolverton Street.
Coincidentally, the day after the killing, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson moved out of Wolverton Street to their daughter's place at 358 Townsend Avenue, where shortly afterwards Florence Johnson developed shingles and John Sharp Johnson himself began to lose his hair. In fact, Johnson wasn't in the greatest of financial health in 1931. The company he was working for, Camel Laird, only produced one vessel in the whole year, so Johnson was in reasonably dire financial straits. Now, when Mr. Shotton had gone on holiday, he asked Johnson to look after his house, which of course preceded a burglary. Clearly Johnson didn't do a great job. The Wallaces also had asked Johnson to look after their house in 1926 during one of their vacations. So it was reasonably safe to presume that Johnson was familiar with the dwellings of Wolverton Street. There also seemed to be dysfunctional locks in Wolverton Street, and by some kind of error, the keys for each dwelling fitted every other single house on the street.
It was myself and my husband who killed Julia Wallace. It was obvious, really. The cat was the giveaway. It had been missing for some weeks, but reappeared on the night of the killing. We used it to lure Julia Wallace next door on the night of the killing, while we slipped in through the back door undetected. We started by rummaging through the upstairs bedroom in search of Mr. Wallace's savings, which turned out to be non-existent, so we started downstairs towards the front parlour for the collection money. Much to our chagrin, Mrs. Wallace had returned to the house and was sitting in the parlour when we arrived. I liked Mrs. Wallace, but it wasn't conducive for her to know that we were robbing the neighbourhood. Panicked, John hit out with There was no blood anywhere because there were two of us to shield it. John, my husband, had been out of work for some time, and to survive, he'd used his spare key to ransack all the houses on Wolverton Street. The lack of a forced entry baffled the police, but it was obvious, really. He saw Wallace leave his house on the Monday evening and made the Qualtrough phone call. And we were still in the house when Wallace returned from Menlove Gardens East and tried to open the back door. We quickly disappeared next door to clean up before re-emerging to assist Wallace and check we'd finished our work. My feigned surprise gave me the chance to feel for a pulse. My husband sent Wallace upstairs to check the rest of the house, a nonsensical act because the poor man had already been upstairs, but it gave us the chance to. Before going off to report the crime to MPC Sanders at Anfield Road, Bridewell. The next day, fearing capture, we moved in with our daughter at 358 Townsend Road and never visited Wolverton Street again, although we were called to Wallace's trial much later on, where John mentioned that he didn't even know Julia's first name.
It makes sense that Mr. Qualtrough could be two depurate and collaborative people. One to scrutinise the front of the domicile, and the other to the rear for Wallace's migration at that doomful and ominous time. The strategic regulation of two people in the front parlour was cardinal in the forestalling of blood spill, which would be tantamount to such an execrable assailant.